This interview is being conducted for St John Scotland, 75 Years of Making a Difference. My name is Dr Sue Morrison and the respondent is Lynn Cleal. This is March 2022 and the interview is taking place in Cove, Argyll. Thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed for the project, Lynn. For the record, would you please confirm your name?
Yes, it's Lynn Cleal.
And would you mind giving me your rough age?
50 plus.
Thank you. Would you mind if I asked a few background questions?
No, that's fine.
Where were you brought up?
I was born in Iserlohn, Germany, and then brought up in Aberdeen, Scotland. And then I moved to Edinburgh 25 years ago. And then I moved to Cove 7 years ago.
Thank you very much. Would you mind telling me a bit about your family background?
Yeah, my father was military. And when he retired, my mother was from Aberdeen, so we moved back to Aberdeen. And then I travelled for about 18 years and came back to Scotland and moved down to Edinburgh for work. I had been working for another children's charity at the time, so with work being so busy, I had to sort of step back from the children's charity, but then I found I was missing something. So my husband and I decided we'd go into a charity together, so we've got something each. So that's 10 years ago now, I joined St John Scotland.
How did you first hear about St John Scotland?
It was through a friend. I'd always seen St John Ambulance. I'd never realised St John Scotland. And a friend had been invited to a fundraising garden tea in Edinburgh. So Andrew and I, we went and we really liked the people we met. So we signed up and here we are.
Could you tell me what your first activities involved?
With the charity, putting stamps on envelopes, and then we used to do church fairs. So I always seemed that I was on the tombola side of the event. So that's really what we did first. We would can collect and just general bits and pieces. We always supported another charity called Seagull Trust, so we would help there as well. So little bits and pieces. And then as we grew in numbers, the previous chair and I decided we'd sort of take off and do something else. And when I took over the fundraising, that's when I came up with sort of the idea of we could do something bigger for Edinburgh to get all the volunteers keen and engaged with what we were doing. So St John Scotland, the head office, had already started to put defibrillators out in golf clubs. So we decided we wanted to make them more public access. So I did a bit of research and found out what the situation was with out of hospital cardiac arrest. So when I took it to the executive, they all thought it was a great idea. So then we took the idea to the board, and Andrew and I created a framework for the type of project we wanted. And once it was accepted, we went out there. We were given a year to prove that it was a good core project, and the outcome was amazing. So our prior at the time, Major General Mark Strudwick, said he wanted to make it a national project. So the other 11 areas came on board. Their project's slightly different from Edinburgh, but same idea. They put out public access defibrillators and also teach bystander CPR to sort of go hand in hand with it.
Could you tell me about how you fundraised for these activities?
For the well, no, that was the beauty of the Edinburgh project. We call it the St John in the City Defibrillator Project. And we basically named it that because we knew any area could take the city out and say it's St John in the community, St John in the... But it ended up, Edinburgh became St John in the City. And the core, the idea was to go out and get businesses to engage. So it doesn't cost St John anything with the Edinburgh project. I get money from other companies, and then we put them in touch with my defibrillator supplier. They pay them directly, and the equipment sent to me, I check it over. we get it all put up, and when we do a presentation, and we sometimes, you know, the donor might say, I'd like it on my street, or I'd like it here, but I check the area. If there's maybe 4 or 5 in the same area, we say, well, why don't you put it here? So we've now got a nice scattering. I think we're at 350 now, scattered all around the Edinburgh area. So, and yeah, we thought, well, we'll draw a line under it, but especially through COVID, even through lockdown, we ended up 48 times that the defibrillators were coming out of the cabinet to help with an emergency. So there's a big demand, and I think, you know, especially after the World Cup, you know, the footballer that collapsed, it's just gone through the roof. So yes, it's busy.
Do you get any civic support in Edinburgh for this particular project?
Well, I engaged with the Lord Provost of Edinburgh at the time, and he gave the permission to have a civic reception twice, in fact, 2 different Lord Provosts. And on the back of that, we got quite a lot of advertising. The problem we have with St John Scotland, the majority of people think we're St John Ambulance. And it was really to educate people and to get them familiar with the brand in Scotland. So the publicity was quite a big thing for me, you know, so people could see it. And from the civic reception, it ended up, it grew arms and legs, you know, all of a sudden everybody knew about it. So the airport wanted defibrillators, the police stations wanted defibrillators. So I'd said to the Lord Provost, why don't we look at the trams? And they'd had really bad press for the digging up of the roads. And I thought it would be a great way to give back so they could show what they were doing. So they agreed to put a defibrillator on every tram. So we got 30 donors, and we then installed them on the tram. So really you've got a defibrillator passing every 3 minutes either side, and have been used several times. And the idea was, if there was an emergency, anybody at the tram stop could push the emergency button, and the next tram would come and stop with the defibrillator. And the call handlers at the trams will notify the ambulance service, so that they would make it. Some of the tram stops are in awkward positions, so it would be a case of they would make room for the ambulance to come up. So it works, it's a great team, and often, you know, where we had defibrillators, the tram would put a spare set of pads onto one of their moving trams, so one of my volunteers could get them and replace the pads. So it worked out perfectly for us. And on the back of that, which is really excellent, the trams now allow us to stand through, you know, the international, the rugby, and we stand at the tram stop at Murrayfield can collecting. So usually after, you know, a 2 or 3 session of can collecting, we have enough money and we purchase a defibrillator and a cabinet, and we put that out in the name of St John Scotland Edinburgh Volunteers. So I think we've got about 5 now that the volunteers have fundraised off the back of the defibrillators and can collecting.
That's brilliant.
Yes, it's very good.
You mentioned something to me off camera about the plaques.
Yes,
Can you explain
yeah.
that to me, please?
So I think the idea was to try and take the fear out of everything to do with defibrillators and make it easy, you know, because I'm sure that the adrenaline must be pumping if somebody's running to get in a defibrillator. So what we did, we created this plaque, and it's got like St John and the City Defibrillator Project, and it has who it's donated by, and then underneath it's got an emergency reference. So if you were phoning 999, you would quote the reference, and I've already uploaded all the information onto the circuit, which is the national database for the defibrillators. So with that code, they can then say, we know you're at EH6, the ambulance is on its way. And it allows the person then to take the defibrillator and go. They don't have to worry about where they are. And I'm sure myself, if I had an emergency, I wouldn't know what part of town I was in, let alone your international, you know, community that we have and the tourist business in Edinburgh. So we tried to make it as easy as possible, and the beauty of that too is as soon as it has come off the database that it's a way to be used, they then send me an email to say your defibrillator's being used in an emergency. So I know then to call upon one of my volunteers or myself if I'm in town to have a spare set of pads ready to go and replace it, so it's then put back in the cabinet ready for the next emergency. So we have 2 or 3 that we found through lockdown, like Scott Monument, I think has already been out the cabinet 6 times over the last year or so. So the idea is to make sure as soon as it comes back into the cabinet, it's in working order and we've got all the information back onto the circuit as ready for the next emergency. So with the Scottish Ambulance and myself started to organise this about 5 years ago, and then the circuit came on board. So all that information's gone over to them. And the programme, from as far as I'm concerned, is working really well. Apart from when I get pinged at 2 o'clock in the morning to say the defibrillator's now out of the cabinet. So, which is good. I just then send a quick email to somebody to check it the next day. So it's very good. So it's working well. It's a great project.
How many defibrillators would you say are across Edinburgh now because of the work that you did initially?
Oh, well, I'm not too sure. I know what we've put out. We've put out roughly 350. But through speaking to different places, you know, like your spas and your Scott Mids, they came to the original civic reception and then took it on board. And I think now every Scott Mid has a defibrillator in their shop. We then got involved. I'd invited a range of people to the civic reception, from churchgoers, government, schools, anybody, you know, like the scouts, the guides, anybody that could be part of it, so I could get a guardian to keep an eye on the defibrillator. And one of the ministers that came to the civic reception was very impressed with what was going on, and he then contacted the Church of Scotland. So they've recently just put 50 defibrillators in their churches throughout Edinburgh area. So it's people like that. The Bank of Scotland, Royal Bank came on board, and then they purchased 30 and they put 4 out in Edinburgh, and the rest went in other areas. So it's because you take the stress away from it, you know, because they contact me, I'm like a support team for them. So I'll go and say, yes, it could go on that wall, or no, it can't, because somebody coming around the corner might hit their head. So it's like an advisory, you know, and then give them the details. They get my discount. So, and then they get the invoice so they can put it on their books. And so the pain part of donating to a charity is taken away. So it works out really, really good. And of course, all the host sites are absolutely delighted because they are seen to be giving it to the community. And then we come in and then train. If it's like a community centre or a church, then we'll come in and train as many people as they like, bystander CPR. We take the defibrillator out of the cabinet, we show them how easy it is to use, and then it tells them, you know, step by step how to do CPR, right down to it has a heartbeat going, so you know the beat to how many beats you do per second. So it's really good.
Who delivers the CPR training?
Well, I used to start off with, and then I've got a lovely lady who's come on board, Anne Mitchell. She's now my CPR lead for Edinburgh. She's got nursing background, so she's fantastic. So up until now, we've basically gone out. Brian Finlay, who was one of my ambulance paramedic instructors, he taught us to start off with. He would come out and show all the volunteers how to do it. And they would come around. We went to Edinburgh Castle. We donated 4 to Edinburgh Castle because of the size of it. And then we went in, I think there was 8 CPR volunteer champions, we call them. I went into Edinburgh Castle and we taught the soldiers there and the trust staff. So a nice story, but a story. We went in on the Thursday, Friday, teaching everybody. I think it ended up, it was about 80 people we taught. And on the following Thursday, we were going to do the big presentation, and the Edinburgh Castle had gone all out, and the 105 rifles, they came on. They're the ones that fired the gun at 1 o'clock. So they got the big guns all ready, so we had this huge presentation all organised. But on the Monday, an Australian gentleman and his wife had come to visit the castle, got his ticket, and halfway up the hill had a cardiac arrest. And two of the people that we trained on the Thursday came, and one gave him CPR and the other ran and got the defibrillator, and they kept doing this until the ambulance arrived, which was absolutely fantastic. And then on the Thursday we were notified by the wife that her husband was sitting up in bed. The family had flown over from Australia. So it was a lovely story. So when we did the presentation with the big guns, and we had the 4 donors there, the media came, it was all filmed. It was fantastic, great publicity for St John Scotland. So we've got lots of great things that come out of really emergency settings. I now have 6 cardiac arrest support, survivors who support the charity, and they go out and they fundraise. I have one gentleman who gets on his bike every year and cycles from Edinburgh to Glasgow, raises lots of money, and I think he's now on his 8th defibrillator he's purchased through his fundraising. We have them come out and help with the teaching of CPR, and a lot of them love to come into the schools because they can see this is the next generation teaching them. And you know, we have a great time with the children, and we invite the community police along, so they come in, so it's a fun day for the children to learn what we're doing. So,
what ages are the children?
They range from 5. We teach primary school, so they range from 5 up to 11. So the 5-year-olds come in with their teddy bears and their dolls and everything. So we know that they're not capable of doing CPR, they're not strong enough, but they're capable of telling somebody else, and they're very quick to tell you if you're doing it wrong. So then as we get older, then the primary 6 and 7, we bring out the resuscianis, and they all get hands-on experience. So it's really good, and they see the defibrillator. A few of the schools, we have put defibrillators on the gates there, so they know what it's about, and it's also educating them, teaching them it's not a toy. You can't go and stick a pad on Johnny's head because it's not going to work. You know, don't go taking it to go and show friends because it's for an emergency. Your granny, your grandpa could have a situation. If it's not in the cabinet, it's not there. So by teaching the young generation, you're getting a knock-on effect. One of the rugby games I was at was Scotland-France, and it was a French supporter that stood and talked to me. You know, he was busy putting money into our can, and they all get taught at school from a young age. So that's where I thought this is where it's got to go. And I'd gone to the Lord Provost and asked him, would it be possible to go into some of the schools to do this? And he was delighted. So right now I was in the middle of writing a paper with one of the councillors to go to the council board and the finance to fund defibrillators for all the primary schools. So right now it looks like that's going to pass. So it's great. So something we created 4 or 5 years ago, now they're seeing the benefits. They've got the proof, they've got the data. And you know, I think when we started it was 1 in 20 would survive a out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. I think we're now down to 1 in 10. So educating people is key to the whole process, and the defibrillator is really the icing on the cake. You know, if you don't have a defibrillator, just keep doing CPR.
How many volunteers do you have to check the defibrillators and change the pads and all that kind of
Right. With the defibrillators, I have 8 volunteers help me. So they go around once a month. The hosts check it, you know, if they're going in, if like say it's a library or something, they'll go in and check it every day, that the green light's still flashing in the cabinet. But I actually have a volunteer go take it out, clean it down, make sure everything's fine, and put it back in the cabinet. They'll let me know, and I update the information onto the circuit that once again it's been checked. The defibrillators we buy are really top of the range, so very little is going to happen to them. You know, all you really have to do is, if they have been used, you can only use the pads once, so you have to replace the pads, which is about an 18-month life, and the battery's 5 years. So the manufacturers have really developed them quite well, so they're not just going to not work. So, but it's just, I think, for me, it's peace of mind that there has been eyes on it and everything's fine. And then through COVID, you know, the volunteers were all, what can we do, what can we do? So they were all went out with hand sanitizers, wipes and everything, and they cleaned the cabinet, the handles, and it gave them something else to do, so it was good. But eight people have the database and look after them. And we try to keep it into their postcode, so, you know, if somebody lives in EH3, they're looking after the ones in that area.
Are there any challenges?
No, I wouldn't say. We've had a couple where somebody's decided, you know, after maybe a few beers to take them out, but they've always been returned, and the police are very much on board. So any time that I have a problem, they're very quick to go down their CCTV cam, you know, to see what's happened. But in the 5 years, we've had 2 that have gone missing, and one which somebody had taken it out for emergency and didn't know what to do with it afterwards. And I think about 6 weeks later, a Scottish ambulance phoned to say, we've got one of your defibrillators sitting in our station. So yes, and I think education, you know, helps by telling them there's not really a huge market for second-hand defibrillators. Nobody's going to buy one, so they don't go. With Seagull Trust, they're very keen. They have they take people up and down the canal at Ratho, and they then decided they'd put defibrillators on, and it works really nice because they carry our livery on the barges because we already purchased them for them years ago. So now they have inside each barge a plaque saying this is what's going on. So, you know, once we come out of COVID again, the restrictions, and they're back up and running, we'll do a session where we teach on the barge as we're going down, and we'll just invite. They have quite a few challenging situations there, and we found now, we went to one, and it was an open house, and we had 3 or 4 ladies appear in their wheelchairs, teach me CPR, but they had their tray, and I thought, well, this is what we do. So we put one of our blow-up Resuscianis on the tray, and they were all doing it, and we knew, well, they would never be able to do it, but we then made one of the ladies teach 4 people standing there, and I was glad she wasn't teaching me because she was very determined they were going to do it properly. So anybody, any walk of life, any kind of ability or disability, it's not a challenge. It's easy enough to sort of break everything down in a way other people can work with it.
Would you say that you've created a model that could be used in other areas? The model in Edinburgh is perfect for any other area or any other charity, and for St John Scotland, we now know we've got 11 other areas doing the same thing. They do it slightly different, where they get the community to fundraise and get the money, and then they help get everything set up. But the CPR, so we now have the defibrillators and CPR are 2 of our core programs we do in St John Scotland. So yes, the start of St John in the City has created this wonderful event, and of course with that people have got something to work with, so we are getting lots of interest. And on the back recently, I'll leave Andrew to tell you about it, we then had decided we were big enough that we could sort of open it up and start doing patient transport in Edinburgh. So we started that at the beginning of the year. So, but that's Andrew's story. I made him the lead for patient transport, so it's a great success there too. Excellent, thank you very much. Are you aware of any other activities that St John Scotland are involved with?
Yes, yes. So I think it's we have 5. So we have defibrillators, CPR, patient transport, first responders, and we also deal with mountain rescue. So each area, you know, for Edinburgh, we don't have mountain rescue, we don't have first responders. But other areas do, and sort of like Dundee, a very big patient transport. I think they were the ones who initiated it in the first place, and huge success there. So yes, it's great. And because we're not really a medical charity, we're not like St John Ambulance. At least we're touching where we're able to teach people, you know, quick and easy ways to do things so that they can remember it.
What scope do you think there is for St John Scotland to move into other areas of this kind of healthcare provision training?
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they're even looking at that yet. I think then we're very much a volunteer-based run charity, you know, that's backed by the volunteers. And I think if you were going down the medical route, you would really then need to start bringing in qualified people. And I'm not sure if a lot of the volunteers who are all walks of life would be happy giving out, you know, for for bystander CPR, it's very easy. We call it the doctor's ABC, and it's like a repetitive. And people know, well, what we're doing, anybody can pick up on YouTube. But because we do it in a very professional way, you know, and because we don't charge anything, I would say that's the nearest thing medically we're doing. I don't know if the board, the trustees, have plans to sort of venture out any further.
Thank you very much. Looking at St John Scotland as an organisation, what do you think are the main challenges for them, given that we've just come through a pandemic, we're in 2022, moving forward, what do you think the main challenges will be?
I think some of not so much for Edinburgh, I don't see a challenge, because being a city, there's always places we can go, doors we can knock on. Some of our rural areas within St John, you know, I think they might have more of a challenge. I think with us now, it's kick-starting what we've been doing previously before the pandemic. And we're now actively organising what they're going to call the toolbox of training for CPR, the leads and instructors. So it's getting back out there. All through lockdown with Edinburgh, we were very active because I'd got all the planning permission from the council to allow all the churches to have the defibrillators put on their walls. And we ended up, there was only 4 where they said no because of the listing. So Reverend Michael Mayer, he is my assistant now. He would go round on his motorbike, and we videoed it on Zoom, and I was speaking to city planners. So all through lockdown we put the 50 out. So we're away to teach 50 churches what to do, and 3 of the churches have already used their defibrillator. So I wouldn't say there's a challenge. I think we've got a backlog, and I'm sure with the volunteers, they're all eager to get back out there and work. So I'm not sure how head office, it's getting everything so everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. You know, you can't really have an organisation like us where everybody's doing their own thing. It's got to be uniform, where if I was to go to St John Aberdeen, they're teaching exactly the same way as I'm doing it. It's got to be that way. You
and your team have done a terrific job of advertising St John Scotland across Edinburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that other areas are similarly good at advertising themselves?
Yeah, well, I think with Edinburgh being the capital, you know, and I was very fortunate that the Lord Provost came on board as quickly as he did. And the advertising, and on top of that, having the castle, huge tourist, biggest one in Scotland, and the trams, You know, for us, we find the supporters come off the trams, they've already seen the defibrillator, and here we are with our bibs and our cans, and, you know, and eagerly, as they're taking their ticket out of their wallet, they're taking their credit card to tap, you know, contactless. So I always find that we become quite the pilot area to try something out. But I would say all the areas are actively doing the very best they can. You know, some of the rural areas do really well because they have maybe 5 defibrillators, but everybody knows it, and everybody knows it's St John's, sort of Dumbarton or whichever area it is. So yes, I think you know, it's a bit like everything else. I like to think that everything we fundraise and raise goes back to what the charity needs. But you know, if you were able to have sort of a billboard on or a poster on a bus saying St John's Scotland, you know, and it's a lot easier just to say everybody say you're St John Ambulance. And we used to go into a big story. No. Now we just say, well, we're a branch of, I always say we're a branch of St John International. England has St John Ambulance, we're St John Scotland. And people seem to understand, you know, because we're all over the world. So the logo says it themselves, but most people look at it and say St John Ambulance. And we all do the same thing. We're out to help the public, so it's good.
Thank you. What would you say is your favourite memory of your involvement with St John Scotland?
There's been lots of memories. I think my favourite memory was at the end of the night in the civic reception when I ended up with the forms and there were 30 people said, contact us, we want to buy a defibrillator. So for the charity, I knew what was meant to happen in a year happened overnight, and it really did sort of take off. And getting our first cardiac arrest survivor to come on board and say, listen, without the defibrillator, I wouldn't be here and I want to help. So that's so rewarding. And you go round the schools and just the enthusiasm of the children. And I think also the teachers, you know, we do all walks of life, you know, for this. And, it's, you know, to me, the cardiac arrest survivors, they have their own story to tell. And our second civic reception, I decided not to make it the same way as the first one. So I brought together the cardiac arrest survivors and I actually brought them together with the person that saved their life. And it was very much, you know, it became very much a Cilla Black moment. You know, but what from that, the room then all came up and said, how do we buy this? You know, because people were there. Kaylee did a fantastic project for me. I'd asked her to get something together that we could have in a loop running all the time. And it was people all of a sudden going, oh, that's him. You know, so the 8 cardiac arrest survivors were in the room, working the room too. And we presented the person that saved their life with a certificate of appreciation. But what I found was really nice was that 8, and it's usually men, the 8 men got together and they've now formed their own little group because they range from about 38 on, and you know, until you go down that road you don't know what's going in their mind. And for them to be able to talk to each other, you know, and one of the survivors, Michael, and I know he won't mind me telling the story, he bought a winter jacket and he'd been fitted with an internal defibrillator. And all of a sudden, you know, he thought the house alarm was going off. And he said, oh, you know, to his wife. So he took the jacket off and he said, I don't feel great. So it ended up, he phoned his cardiologist and the jacket had magnetic bits at the back of the zip, and it set off his internal defibrillator. So, of course, he then was telling these other 7 men about it, and they all went, oh, I didn't know that. So it was there again, the education, you know, out of somebody's near tragedy came this wonderful thing. And there's a picture we have of the 8 of them all together, and there are 8 rescuers behind them. And I think that's my favourite moment. I think that is my favourite moment.
Wonderful. Moving forward, what do you think, or what are your hopes for St John Scotland?
Just keep on and grow. I'm very much for education. I think the more people know it's easy and that it's within them and their hands to save somebody's life, not just to step over somebody, then I feel then that I've achieved what I've always wanted to. Both Andrew and my father died of heart attacks. Andrew's father was a cardiac arrest years and years ago. And so when we, as an area, were speaking about CPR and defibrillators, it really touched a chord with us. So, and as I say, meeting the cardiac arrest survivors, I hope Kaylee lets you see the video because you'll meet them on the screen. Their stories are unique because they don't know what's happened. 1 minute they're out jogging, the next minute they're 2 days later in hospital thinking, what's happened? Or they're coming off a train and have a cardiac arrest. So you meet these people and from what we're doing, and the other charities teaching CPR as well, it is making a huge difference. And it's just the young volunteers coming on board wanting to do the same. We've got we had young girls busking down at the meadows. One of their grandfather died of a cardiac arrest, so she went out busking because she wanted to put a defibrillator in the area her grandfather died. And from that, her school picked up the project she did. So they then did a fund run in the park and raised enough to put another 2 defibrillators. So it's the roll-on effect, from one person doing something. And we've had quite a lot going out now in memory of somebody that's passed. So it's really nice, when you walk by and you see, it's a proud moment to see a defibrillator out. And we're very fortunate in Edinburgh, we've got quite a lot of volunteers. And, they say that when they're passing and they see the defibrillator, it's like a proud moment for them, which is great. It's great. I feel like I've done what I should have, which is good. And it's with the help of everybody else. It's a team. We're a big team, so it's good.
How do you recruit your volunteers?
Before, it used to be word of mouth. And once we started putting defibrillators out in host sites, a lot of the host sites would say, oh, we'd like to become involved. But then it got very challenging, very big. And we then went to head office and said, we need to find unique people to do a different or a specific job. So coordinators and with the patient transport, they then used the head office recruited the people we needed. But it used to be, we were vetted. Andrew and I were vetted when we first joined 10 years ago. It was we had to be introduced and then we had to wait for the executive to say, oh yes, we quite like them. But now it's, with the church project, it's been great because as it's been going on, my details are left with them for emergencies. And I've had quite a few nurses call up and say, we'd like to come on board your CPR team. So it is word of mouth, and with the schools, we've had a couple of teachers, because they've maybe got a story in the background, and it was quite funny. You'll do something. I get called the defib lady, and I've got builders working on my site the other day. So one of them had said, "Oh, where are you going?" And he saw me putting some defibrillators in the car, and I said, "Oh, I'm away to do a presentation in Edinburgh." And he went, oh, right. He said, a defibrillator saved my granny's life. And I went, oh, really? He said, yes. He said she was at a Cayley in Helensburgh. And 1 minute she was dancing, the next minute she was on the ground. And fortunately, the hotel had a defibrillator. So, you think, you just don't know who has been affected by this. And the council had come on board and asked if we would consider... they have their benches in memory of, and the upkeep of the benches has gone through the roof. So what they now do is say to people, we're no longer doing benches in memory because they would pay money. But St John's Scotland have this programme, and if you'd like to put a defibrillator out in the memory of your loved one, so they send my details to them. So we've done 4 so far, but it's just busy. For me, I am a volunteer, but I think I roughly give 2.5, 3 days to the project. But I like it. I like doing what I'm doing.
What would you say to anyone considering volunteering with St John Scotland?
Oh no, it's great. It's a great charity. And I always say to them, it doesn't matter how much time. If you've got half an hour, we can use you. If you've got that every Monday between 2 and 5 you're free, fantastic. It's a bit like can collecting. You know, you have like the older grannies will come up and say, I've only got coins. And I always say to them, that's more than I had 2 seconds ago. You know, everybody's equal. So, and whatever they can give, because they're giving it freely, and you want it to be an enjoyable thing. You don't want them to feel guilty because they're not doing as much as other people. Yeah, the charity I worked for before was a children's charity, and very, very easy to can collect, you know, as soon as they knew what you were can collecting for. And it's a bit like children and animals, no problem. But when you're something like St John, people think, who are you? What are you doing? And it was a bit soul destroying. Andrew and I had been out one time, pouring rain about 6-7 years ago, and I think 3 people stopped, put some money in the can, like, who are you? You know, because nobody knew what we did. And I said, there's got to be something we do that attracts or just clicks with people. And when we did this, Susan, have you interviewed Margaret Balfour? Yeah, so her daughter worked up in the castle, and when we were saying, what can we do? And she said, well, why don't we look at maybe fundraising and getting a defibrillator? I'm sure they'll put it up in the castle. So that was fine, but they said no right away. They said, unless you're going to put in all our trust sites, we don't want one. So then Ian had gone through the Waverley station, so he approached the station. Everybody was sent on a mission, go to places and say about defibrillators. And so they said, no, they didn't have any. And he said, should you? And he said, well, I don't know. So anyway, that was a key place. We thought that could be something. And then with my business contacts, I went round about 8-10 different businesses to the owners and said, if I was to do this, would you come on board? And every single one said, yeah, that's perfect. So of course I knew what I needed to do, but then when everybody started coming in, oh no, so-and-so has, or they don't. So then we approached Waverley Station. So we were going to give them 4. And they felt a bit guilty. So they said, you do 2 and we'll do 2. And so they were our first we put out into Waverley. And then we had other places like Milestone, you know, like some care homes, some hospices, which didn't qualify for any kind of government grants. So we started doing that. And then we then said that the 15 businesses I knew all put out. And from one of them was Lynn and Turnbull, the auctioneers in Edinburgh. So of course they had their defibrillator. It was right in view, especially when they were doing their Zoom thing. So of course he'd phone me up and say, I've got 3 people wanting to buy it. I think, oh great. And this is how it just snowballed, you know. And I'd be working away and the phone would ring. Yes, can I buy a defibrillator? And what? So it ended up quite easy. It wasn't like slogging. And it wasn't a case of going to somebody and having to go back and back and back. You know, it was a case of I did a wee presentation, told them about it, and they were on board. And, you know, Andrew and I were both shocked how quickly they came on board. And I think for them, it was because they were seen to be given to the community. It wasn't inside their office, it was on their office wall. And people would go by, and then they would put flyers out saying, we now have a community defibrillator, and the charity St John Scotland are going to be doing free CPR. We've got 2 open houses, please come along. And we'd arrive, and these people would just turn up, and it would be great, you know. So it went really well, and of course, because it was the first time anybody had actually done a big project like that, I think the board and the trustees were a bit nervous. So when Andrew and I actually were in holiday in the Bahamas, and we had to get this framework back because I had a date for the civic reception. And so it was a case of walking the beach and the pair of us bantering it backwards and forwards. And we knew what we had would work. I'm a project manager. So I knew what we had would work, and it would just be slick, it would flow. And we knew if we went back and said it wasn't going to cost St John head office any money, And when we fundraise, and what we purchase is the plaque. I think it's about £10 for the plaque and an advisory plaque saying do this, do that. And we get the free advertising on all the defibrillators. So, yeah, it was great. We knew we'd hit it just right. And, you know, like, I got, two of the police stations had contacted me. I got the community police to come and do a fair with me at Christorfin. And then the stations contacted, and they had in their holding cell, but they weren't allowed to use it anywhere else. So I managed to get 2 people to donate who are ex-police. And then after that, I had 4 police stations say, oh, you know, and in really, really needy areas. And they said, you know, it's an unmanned police station, but it's manned 24/7. So I then contacted the manufacturers, well, the company I used, and I said, you know, up until now, we've purchased X amount of defibrillators. Why don't you gift me some? And I'll put the plaque up in your name. So, of course, they jumped on the bandwagon right away. And so the 4 local police stations have it, and it's been donated by Lairdale Phillips. So from that, the Police Scotland then got in touch with me and said, how about XYZ? So that's my latest project. I managed to get the board to commit, and I thought, coming out of lockdown, we don't want people to think they're not here anymore. So they finally agreed, and I've just delivered 24 cabinets into Police Scotland in Edinburgh, and they're putting on their police stations in West Lothian, Mid Lothian and South East and the borders. So they're going right down the borders. So we're going to have a really big presentation, and we managed to get the Chief Inspector, you know, the big guy, of Police Scotland to agree. So Edinburgh is the pilot, and once we've got that over, then they've asked me to go back in, and I'll take the gentleman that runs the defibrillator project in Glasgow through, so he can meet up and go down the programme as well. So it's all word of mouth. It is word of mouth, and you know, it's a case of I got a phone call from the car park attendants, you know, the meter. We call them the green minis or whatever, the blue minis. And she said, could you come in and do a talk with us into theirs? So I went in, and I ended up becoming educated because the meter people who put tickets on the car find more people having a cardiac arrest in their car. And of course, it might be they're there and somebody's slumped over their car, and they're not allowed to open the car, so they have to phone 999. And the ambulance, the call handler will say, try the door while you're there, and if it's open, they'll say get the person out. So so I went and talked to them, and they put a defibrillator inside, and when they're doing certain jobs, they take it with them. And the same with the trams. They ended up buying 5 themselves, and they're in their repair cars. So they've got their cars out every day, just in case any of the trams break down, but they've got defibrillators. So if somebody pushes the button and says, well, there's an emergency, Granny's having a cardiac arrest in the little house, they can drive straight to it. But when I did the civic reception, we invited the police. We wanted them to know, and I wanted them to come on board, that if anything went wrong, that they'd be on our side. And the day we had our first civic reception was the day they just organised and started their armed police response unit. So they said, is it okay if we bring them to the civic reception? So from the back of that, the Chief Inspector and I sort of helped get a project and a plan for him organised, and he went to his senior boss with stats and everything. And it worked out that 9 times out of 10, the police can be on site before an ambulance, especially if you look at the castle, trying to get up the castle with an ambulance. And so they then agreed that all armed response unmarked vehicles carried defibrillators now. So that's on the back of the project, St John's project. And it was on the back that the fire engines now also said, we can do the same. So it is, I think Andrew and I developed this when it was needed, and and it's great to know that everybody is benefiting from it.
Is there anything else you would like to tell me? I think that's all my questions.
No, I'm just very pleased that we're doing all this, and it's great that the 75th's round the corner, and no, I think it's great, and what we've got happening now is sort of groups, getting together. So you've got a group running and organising how CPR should be done. There's a group running and organised how patient transport, and I think they're getting ready to start a group for the defibrillators. So it's nice to know you're part of a very active organisation, but they're very much family. The 12 areas, we meet at the area fairs 3-4 times a year, and it's great to get together with the other chairs to see what's happening and also to support them. I have 3 or 4 of the chairs contact me quite a lot to say they were trying to do this, that and the next thing, for planning. And one of the problems we did have was the electric cabinets, and putting them on walls. And I'd spoken to my supplier, and the Lord Provost in Edinburgh had said, what could we do for some of the parks? And he said, well, I'll donate all my park bins if you can get your supplier to put solar panels on the cabinets, and we don't need an electric supply. So I was working backwards and forwards about 5 years ago with my supplier, and there was another chap thinking the same lines. So they've got their cabinets, and he now develops it where he's got his park bin with that. But then the Lord Provost had said we could use the meter machines because they already have solar panel on it. And then what we could do is put a box below, and it just keeps the defibrillator or the pads warm. So there's lots of people coming up with great ideas. And one of the other problems was some of the listed buildings. So I got my supplier, I drew a template for her, and it was just like Domino's pizza delivery pouch, it's battery operated, it keeps it warm. So I gave her that and said, look, what do you think? And she's now developed it for me. So it's just like a pizza bag, it's got a battery pack in it, gets plugged in, and it keeps it, so you don't need to have an electric supply to the cabinet, it sits in the cabinet. So I have the template here that we're trying out through winter to make sure it works. So it's good, makes me creative. I'm a bit of an entrepreneur, and I come up with all these ideas, and if I can share them, I'm delighted, but happy to support everybody that's doing great work.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think I've spoken enough. I always get told I speak far too much, so maybe I've said enough.
Thank you very much, Lynn.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.